The flight had just begun to settle when a sharp splash of whiskey cut through the comm, followed by a tense silence that spread through the cabin. Passengers looked up, confused, as an older man sat frozen in his seat, drops of the drink sliding down his jacket. Across the aisle stood a younger passenger, his face red with frustration, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But the energy in the air said otherwise. People could sense something deeper brewing, something tied not just to the moment, but to the way the younger man had been acting since boarding. A flight attendant hurried over, trying to keep the situation calm, though her eyes revealed she already knew this wouldn't be simple. The older gentleman remained quiet, wiping his sleeve with steady hands, his calmness surprising everyone around him. It was as if he held a truth none of them knew yet, something that would shift the balance of the entire situation. Whispers began spreading through the cabin, phones tilted subtly. The younger man kept insisting he didn't mean any harm, but his voice shook. And then the older man finally looked up, ready to speak, ready to reveal something that would make the entire cabin go silent. But before he could finish his sentence, the seatbelt sign dinged. The ding of the seatbelt sign made everyone pause, but the tension stayed thick in the air. The older man leaned back slowly, as if deciding whether this moment was worth addressing yet. His quiet presence only made passengers more curious. A few people whispered that he looked familiar, though no one could place where they had seen him before. The younger passenger, still breathing hard, kept glancing around, hoping someone would defend him, or at least look away. But the cabin wasn't letting this moment disappear. The flight attendant returned, speaking gently to both men, trying to piece together what led to the outburst. She asked the younger man if something had triggered him, but he avoided her eyes and muttered something about being stressed. His answer didn't convince anyone. Even the passengers in the nearby rows exchanged looks. Sensing that this wasn't just about spilled whiskey, the older man remained composed, almost too composed. He finally spoke a little, saying he had dealt with situations like this before. His tone wasn't angry, just steady, measured, and strangely confident. It made people lean closer without realizing it. As the plane leveled out, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. The older man glanced toward the window, then back at the younger passenger, as if preparing to reveal something important, but he stopped mid. Noticing someone new approaching down the aisle, a tall man in a navy blazer stopped beside their row, his badge clipped neatly to his pocket. He clearly wasn't part of the regular cabin crew. Passengers straightened in their seats, sensing he held some authority. The younger passenger stiffened, his jaw tightening as the man introduced himself quietly, asking if everything was under control. His calm voice contrasted sharply with the tension still swirling around them. The older man nodded politely, but his eyes didn't leave the younger passenger. It felt like he was studying him, trying to understand what had pushed things this far. Across the aisle, a woman whispered that incidents like this had been happening more often, especially on long flights. Another man muttered that the airline needed stricter rules. Their murmurs added another layer to the growing conflict, shaping a subplot of passenger frustration and rising expectations for safety. Meanwhile, the flight attendant gave a subtle signal to the man in the blazer, hinting that there was more to the story. He crouched down slightly, asking the younger man to explain his side again. This time, the man looked cornered, as if he realized the situation was no longer something he could brush off. He kept glancing at the older gentleman, whose steady expression made him even more uneasy. The older man inhaled slowly, preparing to speak again just as a sudden overhead announcement interrupted the entire row. Shifting every eye toward the front of the cabin, the announcement crackled overhead, asking all crew members to report to the front immediately. The tone was calm, but it carried a weight that made every passenger straighten. The man in the navy blazer exchanged a quick glance with the flight attendant, then stood up, excusing himself as he hurried toward the front. His sudden urgency only deepened the sense that something bigger was unfolding. The younger passenger shifted uneasily, his knee bouncing. Without the man in the blazer beside him, he looked smaller, almost exposed. He tried avoiding the older gentleman's eyes, but the older man continued studying him with a steady, unreadable expression. It wasn't anger, it was something deeper, something that made the younger man swallow hard, like he already feared what was coming next. A few rows back, passengers whispered about turbulence, security issues, even possible investigations. The atmosphere felt charged, as if everyone was waiting for a storm to break. The flight attendant stayed nearby, watching both men closely, aware that the smallest spark could set everything off again. Then, as the plane hummed through the clouds, the older man finally leaned forward. His voice dropped low, almost too quiet to hear over the engines. He told the younger man that the situation had reached a point he could no longer ignore. Before he could finish, the cabin lights flickered, followed by the sound of fast, urgent footsteps rushing back down the aisle. The urgent footsteps came from the man in the navy blazer, but now his expression had completely changed. His calm professionalism was gone, replaced by a tight, focused look that sent a ripple of unease through the nearby rows. He leaned toward the flight attendant, whispering something that made her eyes widen. She glanced quickly at the older man, then back toward the front of the aircraft, as if weighing what to do next. Before anyone could process it, the pilot's voice came over the speakers, sounding more serious than before. he announced that there had been a sudden issue involving a passenger's identification and that certain individuals would need to remain seated while the matter was reviewed. The cabin erupted in low murmurs. People looked around, trying to figure out who the announcement was referring to. The younger passenger froze, his face losing what little color it had left. He quietly asked the older man if this had something to do with him, but the older man didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave a long, steady look that suggested he knew far more about what was unfolding than anyone else. Meanwhile, a new tension spread as two additional airline staff walked down the aisle, something passengers almost never saw amid. Their eyes scanned the rows, not for trouble, but for someone specific. They stopped right beside the younger man's seat. The two staff members paused beside the younger passenger, their calm expressions leaving no room for argument. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked as they asked him to confirm his identity. The entire cabin fell silent. Even the soft hum of the engines felt distant as everyone waited for the moment to unfold. The younger man hesitated, then finally handed over his ID with shaking hands. The staff compared it to something on a small tablet, exchanged a look, and nodded. That was when the older man finally leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. He explained that the airline had been alerted to suspicious behavior before boarding, and when the whiskey incident happened, it was enough to trigger a full review. He said he hadn't wanted things to reach this point, but the safety of the passengers came first. The younger man's eyes widened. He asked quietly, almost pleading, how the older man had known. That was when the older gentleman reached into his jacket and revealed a discreet badge, the kind only top executives carried. Murmurs spread as passengers realized he wasn't just important. He was one of the highest-ranking owners of the airline itself. The younger passenger slumped back, stunned, but before anyone could react further, the tablet beeped again. One of the staff frowned and looked at the older man. "There's something else," she said softly. "His ID isn't the only one with a flag. Yours just triggered a new alert too." The older man lifted his eyebrows, surprised and, for the first time since the flight began, he didn't know what was coming next. The cabin fell quiet as the staff explained the unexpected alert. It wasn't a warning against the older man, but a notification that a major airline audit was happening that same day. His presence on the flight triggered an automatic check, something that usually happened quietly in the background. The realization eased the tension instantly. Even he let out a small breath, shaking his head with a calm smile. The staff apologized for the sudden disruption, and he assured them it was all part of keeping the airline safe. He then turned back to the younger passenger, who looked drained and embarrassed. Instead of scolding him, the older man spoke gently. He said that moments like these were reminders of how stress, fear, and misunderstandings could push people to act out of character. He encouraged him to use the experience as a chance to reflect, not to feel defeated. The younger man nodded, grateful and humbled. Finally understanding the weight of what had happened, as the plane began its descent, passengers relaxed again, some whispering about the surprising turn of events. The flight attendant thanked the older man quietly, relieved everything had ended peacefully. The older gentleman simply smiled and said that respect, calm thinking, and accountability kept the skies safer. When the wheels touched down, the cabin felt lighter, everyone carrying a quiet lesson about patience,